The Charlie Brown animated Christmas special began life and grew out of the Charles Schulz syndicated Peanuts comic strip that first hit the papers on October 2nd, 1950. And it would run successfully from that date, 1950, October 2nd, until February 13th of 2000. As far as the history of comic strips, and as far as comic strips go, it is historically noted as being the most influential and most popular. And I think that is supported by the fact that at its peak, it enjoyed a readership and a fan base of 355 million readers, as well as being in 2,600 papers, being translated into 21 different languages, and being read in 75 countries. So that's, I think, a rather significant legacy for just the cartoon strip itself. And adding to that, the residuals and merchandising profits enjoyed by Charles Schulz from this comic strip itself, just the comic strip itself, would gross him $1 billion. Now, how do we move from that to the Charlie Brown animated special? Glad you asked. 1965, the Peanuts characters appeared on the cover of Time magazine. Now, ironically, about the same time that it appeared, Coca-Cola was looking for a special to back for the Christmas season for 1965. And they reached out to producer Lee Mendelsohn and inquired with him as to whether or not he had any ideas or had anything in the works that they might be able to back and support as a Christmas special for that year. And Lee Mendelsohn, now in speculation, probably looking at the cover of the Time magazine edition, says to the Coca-Cola advertising agent, "I've got just the thing. A animated Christmas special on Charlie Brown that I'm actually working on right now with Charles Schulz." Coke says, "Great, we're interested." So apparently, from there, Mr. Mendelsohn, after the conversation with Coca-Cola's advertising agency, turned around and called Charles Schulz and says, "Hey, I just sold the Charlie Brown Christmas special." and allegedly the reaction from Charles Schulz was that, "You just sold what?" It hadn't even been created. Charles Schulz himself had no notion or idea of what this thing was. But he managed to get the ball rolling on this, and he brought on board Bill Melendez, film producer and animator. And then as far as the music was concerned, he originally approached Dave Brubeck about doing the score for this production, this animated special. And for whatever reason at that time, Dave passed it on to Vince Guaraldi. And at that time, it just so happens that Vince Guaraldi enjoyed a reasonable success with a recording of a song that was entitled "Cast Your Fate to the Wind." You might remember that song by Vince Guaraldi, "Cast Your Fate to the Wind." Moving from this, we come to where now the production, is underway. It took 6 weeks to write the storyline, develop it, and then there was another 6 months to produce the actual feature on a shoestring budget. One of the other things I also want to mention, I think that is of significance when we talk about the music, one of the things heard on the recordings for the soundtrack are children's voices. And the voices that you hear were actually from the children's choir at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in San Rafael. So there are still some of those children around that were actually a part of that production. As far as the children's voices are concerned, the most iconic recording from the soundtrack for Charlie Brown Christmas Special with our featured is Christmas Time Is Here. And just kind of a backstory on this, there were some situations where these kids were being kept out for late night sessions and being brought back with anxious parents waiting in the parking lot, wondering where their children were at all hours of the night. And from what I understand, that there were a number of changes over the course of the production, because you had some parents that actually took their children out of the lineup for those kids that were brought on board to sing. But anyway, now moving forward. So in the meantime, Coca-Cola had also sold this idea to CBS. So CBS was going to air it. So they had set up that relationship, and so we get to the point where now all of this has been done, and there's the time now for the screening. Okay, so, and this is within days of the airing. Now we're talking about, maybe within 2 days before it's scheduled to air, you have the executives from CBS, Lee Mendelson, Bill Melendez, Charles Schultz, and a host of whoever else in the screening theater to see this thing. And the CBS execs were just really besides themselves. They felt like this thing was a guaranteed flop. Among the things that they found to be problematic, at least as far as where they saw it, was that they used child actors. And then also this jazz was being used, and there was no laugh track, and they felt like it was in the wrong time slot, that this should have been set up for Saturday morning, for the Saturday morning cartoon hours, okay, as opposed to being programmed during prime time for Thursday night. But it was already in the TV guide schedules, ready and set to go, and they sort of just hung their head and said, this thing is not going to fly. This is just a disaster of a failure waiting to happen. So that was pretty much the feeling that was lingering in the air around the Charlie Brown Christmas Special prior to its airing. So come Thursday night, the date I believe was December 9th of '65, and the Charlie Brown Christmas Special airs. And of course, I'm sure the executive of CBS are just waiting for the shoe to drop with, all of this just opinions about how did you do this, and this thing was just really a flop. How could you let this happen? But instead, just the opposite. They got calls and responses that were over the top in terms of the rave reviews and just the audience response to this special, which really was a shocker and a surprise to them. So moving from there, of course, this became part of what is now a tradition And I think one of the other things to be given consideration to is the fact that the Charlie Brown Christmas special, and I don't know how many people watching this are aware of the fact that it comes out of the Bay Area, okay? One of the things that, I think everyone should be able to appreciate, especially if you are native to the Bay Area or have adopted the Bay Area as your home, that among the other creative icons that we have that we can claim here in the Bay Area, and we're talking about Carlos Santana, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Sly and the Family Stone, and among all the others, we also lay claim to the Charlie Brown Christmas special. So I think that's something that is very significant to weigh in on. So, in closing, I'd like to say and wish everyone a happy holiday, and please enjoy the music and the show, and thank you very much for tuning in.